No. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session on legal commercial awareness, and thanks for attending. My name is David Ainscough, and I'm one of the careers consultants, but I'm thrilled to be hosting Chris Stoakes today to help us demystify this particular topic. I hope some of you managed to listen to the video conversation piece that I did with Chris a week or so ago, which sort of preceded this particular session. And I think from just listening to that, you'll know that this session is going to be valuable because it still is a very debatable subject. What is considered to be legal commercial awareness when you go forward to having your legal assessment centres. So as well as the conversation piece, Chris has really kindly agreed to spend an hour going through the topic with us and answering questions that you have. I can assure you that if you filled in the pre-event survey with your question, Chris has seen all of those questions and he has adapted his slide deck appropriately so that he answers them as we go along. But I'll be monitoring the chat for him. So if you want to pop another question in the chat, I can make sure that he'll get to be aware of it as he goes through his slide deck. So I think with that, Chris, and once again, very many thanks from me for doing this. It's over to you.
Thank you very much, David. It's a great pleasure to be talking to you all this afternoon. Just a shameless plug before I start. On this slide, there are two books that I've written. The one on the left, the City one, is about financial markets and how to understand them. And the one on the right is very much about commercial awareness. So if you're looking for more on this topic, those would be places that you might want to go to. And the reason I say that is because students generally seem to find them quite useful and they're not that expensive. They're about 13 quid on Amazon. Right, plug over, commercial awareness. I'm going to cover a number of things this afternoon. First of all, what it is and how to get it. And then I'm going to talk about how employers test for it. And also one of the ways in which I think you can begin to engage with an employer at interview to kind of demonstrate commercial awareness. And then as David was saying right at the end, the questions that you've raised earlier that I haven't answered at that point, I've brought those together at the end and I'll address them. And just by way of background, I'm a former lawyer. I've been a journalist, which is actually, I think, probably where I learned about commercial awareness. And I've been a management consultant as well. So what is it and how to get it? First of all, why should you even bother with it? Certainly when I was in your position, when I was an undergraduate or just graduating, and in my case, joining a city law firm, commercial awareness didn't really exist back then. What mattered was technical expertise, because that's what professional service firms like law firms, accountancy firms, management consultants, even investment banks, fund managers, that's what they prided themselves on. But of course, the world now is far more competitive than it was then, and clients no longer accept technical excellence as sufficient. From their point of view, it's a given. If you join any of the big employer names that you're likely to be interviewing with, then all of their clients go to them because they know they're technically very good. If they didn't have that brand recognition, they wouldn't even get to first base, as it were. So clients go to them because as brands, they have a reputation for technical excellence. So that isn't a differentiator. What actually is a differentiator, in my experience, and what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon covers commercial awareness generally, but I come at it from, I suppose, a legal point of view, because I've spent a large part of my career either as a lawyer or in law firms. And certainly it's true that the way clients judge us as lawyers these days is our ability to contextualize our advice. In other words, instead of just answering the bald, bare legal question, they want us to set that advice in the context of them, their business, what their commercial objectives are. And also because professional service firms now tout themselves as business partners to their clients, being part of the client's team of trusted advisors. If you're a lawyer and you're trying to persuade the client that you understand their business and you don't really seem to understand business in general, that doesn't go down very well. And certainly big law firms these days are complicated businesses. And one of the ways in which we can relate to clients is by saying to them, that sort of issue is an issue that we encounter as a business, not just as a law firm, but as a business. And that's why we can really empathize with where you are at the moment. And that's why the advice we can give you will take all of that background into account. So putting it quite glibly, commercial awareness is a knowledge of and interest in business. Now, this is, if you like, the difficult part. It is an interest in business. It's not something that you can fake, really, and nor is it something that you can sit through something like this or read one of my books and think, okay, I've done it, I can tick the box. It's much more of a mindset, as I'll go on to explain.
Just, I won't interrupt very often, Chris, but I thought it's worth saying that as part of the application and assessment process, being able to talk about commercial awareness in a current context also passes the test of showing that you've done the research. You know, one of the meta tests behind the whole process is, have you researched thoroughly the organization? And so on a topic area of commercial awareness, you can demonstrate you've done the research just by being very current in what you're saying.
That's absolutely right. And in fact, if you go for an interview with an employer organization and you haven't looked at their website and you're not familiar with what they're trying to achieve in business terms, I'd say you haven't done work, and you will be found out by their line of questioning. So that's absolutely right. One of the things I'm going to go on to discuss is one of the big topics at the moment, and how you can kind of refer to it at interview. So I'll come to that in just a minute, but just to get you started, because I wasn't very interested in business at all. I really didn't know what it was. So how can you start to generate that interest now? And what I'd suggest is it's nothing very, I mean, you're all very bright, you know, you're at Cambridge. But what I'm going to suggest is nothing that is kind of intellectually terribly demanding. I just say, look around you. I mean, we all know, we're all familiar with supermarkets. Supermarkets, believe it or not, are incredibly sophisticated businesses. And just from the way they arrange their products, the way they arrange them in their stores, it tells you something. So this is a photo taken at the entrance of the supermarket, and you'll see that it's got fresh fruit and veg. Now, the question I ask myself whenever I'm going around a business is, why are they doing this? Because nothing is done by accident. The reason they put the fresh fruit and veg at the front, so it's eye-catching, is because actually 9/10 of what a supermarket sells is not fresh, it's packaged goods. But we know instinctively that fruit and veg is good for us. So they kind of draw us in, and by seeing that, they're making us think that everything in the store is good for us. Just look around you, as it were. One of the other things that supermarkets do is they track the way we move around their stores. And it's a very famous business example taught at a place like Harvard Business School, that the Walmart, the big US supermarket, it tracked the way people were walking around its stores. And as a result, it put diapers, what we in the UK call nappies, and six-pack packs of beer together. And when it did this, sales of both went absolutely through the roof. And the reason for this, they did this especially on Fridays, is that on Fridays, the mother of the household would send the father out down to the local store, the local Walmart, to get in the diapers for the weekend for the baby. And the father would reward himself by buying a six-pack of beer at the same time. So by sticking them together, they increased sales of both. And certainly in the UK, the Tesco club card, the store card, is written about in academic business circles as an incredible success story in how Tesco's managed to gather a huge amount of personal data about each one of us, more so than our banks. Tesco's and Sainsbury's and the other supermarkets know far more about our spending habits and how we use our money than our banks do, which actually is quite extraordinary. It's why they're able to move into retail banking. So my first suggestion is just look around you. When you're walking down the street and you see a shop, ask yourself, how is this making business? What makes it stand out? How is it coping with the effects of the pandemic? And the other thing that I recommend is, for me, what makes business interesting is people. It's about people. And the most interesting businesses are driven by people who themselves are interesting. So take Ryanair. You probably know that Ryanair is run by somebody called Michael O'Leary. And Michael O'Leary is known for being a big mouth. He's all over the papers. But if you actually delve into his background, he's far more interesting than he sounds. For a start, he's a tax accountant. So although he likes to come across as rather boorish and a barrow boyish, he's not. He's a really smart professional. And what happened was that I think he was at KPMG, and he was auditing all of the various investments and businesses of the Ryan family, one of the richest families in Ireland. And he said to them, you've got this airline which is losing you money, you should close it down. And they, being very savvy, said to him, well, Michael, if you were to take it on and run it and we gave you a percentage of the shares, would you give it a go? So he said, well, I knew nothing about airlines, but I said, yes. And he said, the first thing I realized when I took over was we had no budget, but we needed to market ourselves. So I realized the cheapest way of doing that was if I became the story. And that's why he attracted enormous attention, because he was so outspoken. But in a very recent interview, he said, my media profile may be that I am this rather outspoken, aggressive individual, but I challenge you to name any one of my children. And it's true. He keeps his family well out of the press. So there's somebody who on the face of it could come across as just a loudmouth, but he's a really, really smart guy. And successful businesses are run by very, very smart people, which is what makes them interesting. So apart from looking around me, I also try to find the people story in business. And then the other thing I do is I try to think behind the scenes. So going back to the supermarket, how do those products get on the shelves? Now, you may know that if you're a supplier to a supermarket, unless you deliver the products in exactly the right volume to fit on a shelf immediately, they won't accept it. And equally, take Waterstones, the publisher. Why do they put particular books in their windows? It's partly because they're staff picks. It's partly because Waterstones, the bookseller, is paid by publishers to put books in its window. So it's very interesting looking behind the scenes to see how these things work. Now here, the reason for the picture is if I'm driving down the motorway, still with my eyes on the road, I always like looking out for the haulage trucks to see where they're from and to think about what they might be carrying, because it's just an indication of the business that is going on around us all the time. So what that leads us to is, what is business about? And what most people will say to you is, well, it's about money, It's about making a profit. And I think that actually misses the purpose of business completely. Because to be a successful business, you need to make a profit to stay in business. But actually business is far more interesting than that. For me, the light bulb went on when I realized that pretty well everything I want or need in my life is provided by business. Now, there are big things, like defense, education, those sort of things that government provides, but a lot of those things are provided by the private sector as well. But what business is really about is about competition and innovation, because if you have a really good idea for a service or a product, you're going to attract competition. Other people will see if you're successful that they want to step into that market, and they'll do it in one of two ways. They'll either produce a good or service that is better than yours, or a good or service that is cheaper than yours, and possibly both, better and cheaper. That's the holy grail. And that constant innovation means that the business world is actually very, very dynamic. So if you look at the FTSE 100, the Financial Times Stock Exchange list of 100 largest companies listed on the stock exchange by market capitalization, and you can compare it today to 10 years ago, only about 60%, 60 of the companies that were in the FTSE 10 years ago are there today. In the intervening 10 years, 40 of those companies have disappeared. That's how dynamic the corporate landscape is. So to be a successful business, you've got to be able to provide goods or services that are cheaper or better or both than anybody else, but in a way that creates sustainable competitive advantage. It's no good price cutting to the bottom, a race to the bottom. What you do must be sustainable. Now, if you do that, you will create what business academics call a USP, a unique selling or sales proposition, the thing that makes you stand out. And you'll have to keep on refining that to ensure that you maintain your market position through innovation and change. So for me, Business is very exciting. It's about bringing new things to us, new ways of living that we haven't had before. And the money side is, if you like, a byproduct of that. Now, just some of the language of business. So B2C will be familiar with supermarkets, with banks, for example, restaurants. These are B2C, business to consumer. But actually, the most interesting businesses, I think, are B2B. The businesses you never see, they are businesses that sell to other businesses. Give me an example of that. Well, if you take the auto manufacturing business, automobile business, car makers, if you're a Peugeot or a Volvo, you don't make all of the bits that go into one of your cars. You probably only make about 5 to 10%. The rest you buy in from other businesses. And there will be businesses that specialize in making certain components for cars. And when you start to delve into business, business is like an iceberg. The tip is the bit that we see, the businesses that deal directly with us, B2C. But 9/10 of businesses don't deal with us at all. They deal with other businesses. Other bits of jargon, customer value management. This, going back to the supermarket example, is the idea that if I go to my local supermarket and spend 50 quid a week, from their point of view, that's small beer. But if I do that every week over 20 years, the time that I am a customer of that supermarket, that's a lot of money. And what businesses like supermarkets do is they look at customer value management. They look at the whole economic benefit of serving a particular customer. Data mining, the example I gave you about Walmart, that is the way in which you use data mining techniques, algorithms, to interrogate vast amounts of computerized data to detect buying patterns, which is what Walmart did. Salesforce management is about, in a B2B context, how you manage the interface between you and the businesses that you sell to. Supply chain management, that slide I put up about the trucks, the haulage trucks, that's about supply chain management. And you'll know that at the moment, we've got a real bottleneck in supply chains, not only in this country, but all over the world, partly because of the pandemic, partly because there's been huge built up demand post-pandemic. Supply chain management is actually an industrial science in its own right. It's absolutely fascinating about how you can minimize journeys of trucks that are empty. So if you're using a fleet of trucks or ships, how can you ensure that they've got a cargo carrying back? Brand management is about how you manage everything from the look of the logo to the reputation of the business in the market. USP I've mentioned, it's the unique selling proposition. What is it that makes this business different? And every successful business has one. And then lastly, and this appeals to lawyers, there's a distinction between marketing and sales. Sales is about closing the deal, getting the client or customer to buy your product. Marketing is everything that leads up to that. And in fact, a very good definition of marketing was coined by an academic who said that in the context of lawyers, it's about meeting clients' needs profitably, meeting clients' needs profitably. And I like that, because although we're still post-pandemic and it's not so easy to meet people, I think it's about actually meeting your clients, understanding what their needs are and demonstrating to them that you can meet their needs and that you can also ensuring that you can do it profitably, so that you're not only in business today, but you're also around to be in business tomorrow.
Just, Chris, I think another thing to add to your bullet points there on the list, and not something that's probably got a name yet, but this whole, and we've seen it in the last 2 or 3 weeks, this whole environmental credibility within a regulatory environment. We see chief executives queuing up to just say through the media how environmentally friendly their organizations are, and there is a burgeoning regulatory and legal framework behind that now.
And the thing about it, David, I believe, is that the reason why businesses are interested is it's good for business, not only reputationally, because that's what consumers want and expect these days, but because successful businesses are around for the long haul. Climate change is a threat to them, to their markets, and to their customers. So of course they want to do something about it, because they want to prolong, they want to sustain their business into the future. And it's very interesting that a lot of the drive to if you like, assist businesses when it comes to climate change is coming from their shareholders, their investors, who are big financial institutions like insurance companies and pension funds. And pension funds, for example, they have to plan 30 to 40 years ahead because they provide pensions for people who've been in employment and are now retiring. So they're looking very, very far ahead. So for them, climate change, it's about good business. It's about ensuring that you're providing for your future beneficiaries as a pension fund. And so therefore, the companies that you invest in, you want them to be environmentally aware as well. So the thing that I find reassuring about this is that it is good for business, and businesses understand that, which is why they're embracing it. So I'm going to move on to how employers test for commercial awareness, and really there are two ways, and one of them I think actually isn't very good, but employers tend to do it. And then the other way is through case studies, especially group case studies. But the first way I'm going to look at is it's something current. You know, can you talk about something that's in business news? And I don't really think this is a particularly good way of testing, because, as I say, I believe that being commercially aware is a mindset. It's about having your antennae attuned to the business world, thinking about what the business world does, how it functions, the products it produces for me, the B2B products, the products businesses produce for each other. So this idea of, oh, can you talk about something current? It seems about a bit superficial to me, but because that's something that employers do tend to do, how can we address it? Well, this is where we are at the moment. This is a snapshot of where we are. Release of pent-up demand post-pandemic, global energy shortages, indeed supply chain bottlenecks all over, and shortage of labor in some sectors. So most interviewing employers will recognize that that is the world that they're in. Now, just stepping back from that, what is very interesting about this, and it's an economist called Chris Stoakes who's written about this, he says what this actually shows, all of these bottlenecks, is industries come to an important inflection point. Now, the inflection point is this, that in the 1970s and 1980s, which is way before all of you, businesses tended to have very high inventories of goods, and they did that because communications in those days weren't particularly good. We didn't have the internet, for example, we didn't have email. So they had large supplies of inventory to meet any unexpected demand. And they had large labor forces, and they could go about their business assembling their goods in a fairly ordered way. Then two things happened. One is very high interest rates in the 70s and 80s. So actually having a large amount of inventory lying around, stuff that you've made, is expensive because that represents money that you need. So you need to get that stuff sold. So that was the first problem. They also tended to have lean workforces. So they couldn't adapt quickly to pent-up demand. What they moved towards was low inventories as communications got better with email and internet in the 90s, and just-in-time production. So for example, Volvo, they changed the whole way they produce things. They used to make cars in the hope that if they made enough of the right color, right specification, people would by and large buy them. Now they don't. When you order a Volvo, it is basically made for you. And Dell, Michael Dell, the computer genius, he started this with Dell computers. Dell has always been a made-to-order company. You order a Dell, takes them 2 days, they make it to your specific order. And what this has meant is that businesses are now very efficient, but they're not at all resilient. So as soon as you get with this, post-pandemic supply chain bottlenecks, oh my goodness, I don't have any inventory. And I've got customers screaming out for my products, and I don't have enough people to make them. So what Chris Stoakes has been saying is, this is a very, very interesting illustration of what happens when you become super efficient at the expense of resilience. So one way, if you're in an interview and they're saying, oh, what do you think about business post-pandemic? Well, you can say, well, I think it's very interesting because it illustrates these two conflicting forces. Are you going to be an efficient business, or are you going to be a resilient business? So that's a way of kind of getting into that sort of topic. Now, Something else that is flowing forward, this is inflation, because we've got increased demand that pushes up prices. And you probably know the government generally doesn't like inflation because it discourages people from saving for themselves. So that means government has to step in. And also it disproportionately affects those on low and fixed income. So governments generally don't like inflation, but governments around the world at the moment are caught because they borrowed a huge amount of money to fund their countries through the pandemic. And one of the ways you bring that debt down is through inflation, because what inflation does is it erodes the real value of debt. And unfortunately does that by eroding the real value of money. So if I've got £1 in my pocket, I know it's £1 because when I take it out, it's got £1 stamped on it. And that's its nominal value, from the Latin nomen, meaning name. That's its name, it's a £1 coin. But if yesterday I could go to the baker and buy a loaf of bread for £1, and today it's £1.10, my pound hasn't changed, but what it buys me has gone down. It won't buy me a whole loaf of bread anymore. That is an illustration of how inflation erodes the real value, not the nominal value, but the real value of money. And of course, it erodes the real value of debt. So government is caught between, do we want to control inflation because it affects certain segments of society, or actually are we quite glad that it's going to erode away the full value of our debt? Now, what you don't want to get is stagflation, which is weak growth. So yeah, there's been pent-up demand, but maybe that's just a flash in the pan and that's not going to be sustained. So we're going to get, if we go back to weak growth plus inflation, that's stagnation plus inflation, which is the worst of all possible worlds. So where does this leave policymakers? And essentially, there are two ways in which they can control inflation. One is by raising taxes, because if we've got less money to spend, then that's one of the inflationary pressures that is reduced. The other is by raising interest rates. So what I'm going to do now is just show you what happens when interest rates move, because this is something that as a lawyer I never understood. It's only when I became a financial journalist that I understood this. And even then, nobody explained it to me. I had to kind of sit down and puzzle it out for myself. So let's say the Bank of England raises interest rates. What effect does this have on the stock market? Well, the stock market generally goes down when this happens. Now, word of warning, this doesn't always happen, because if markets have been expecting this, if Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England has been saying for ages, we're going to raise interest rates, we're going to raise interest rates, we're going to raise interest rates, it's already in the price, it's already in the market. But generally speaking, what happens is interest rates go up, stock market goes down, because now it's more attractive in relative terms to take the money I would have put in the stock market and put it on deposit at a bank. I'm going to get a higher rate of interest than I would yesterday. It makes it in relative terms more attractive than putting the money in the stock market. So the stock market generally goes down. Now, the pound sterling goes up, and that's because foreign investors, seeing that interest rates in the UK have gone up, they want to put their money on deposit with UK banks, but they can only do that in pounds. So they take their dollars or whatever their currency is, and they buy the pound in order to have pounds to put on deposit at banks. So sterling goes up. The impact on our exports is our exports go down. Those FTSE 100 companies that I mentioned, 2/3 of them, their biggest markets are export markets. And exports go down because now that the pound has gone up, it's more expensive for importers in other countries to buy our products. So that means that exports tend to decline. Now, company profits go down, partly because exports have gone down and also because interest rates have gone up. Most companies borrow, they use debt, so their profits are going to be affected because they have to pay a higher interest charge on their debt. So company profits go down, and that often also reinforces the decline in the stock market. Now, why am I telling this? Because if you get into a discussion about, what could the Bank of England do about inflation, at least you'll have a sense of what is likely to follow. It doesn't follow in these neat steps. It all tends to happen either simultaneously or not at all. But the other thing about it, and these slides will be available to you afterwards, the other thing about it is this works completely in reverse. So you can reverse the arrows and it also works. So if interest rates go down, you can follow through what happens. Now, that was a detour to say that employers tend to think that commercial awareness is just, what have you seen in the business press that's interesting? And that's just to give you some background about what is happening at the moment that you can talk about. The other way they do it, and I haven't got any more slides on this except this one, is they do it by way of case studies. They might give you a case study to look at. If they're a management consultant, it might be a case study about advising a client on strategy. If it's a law firm, they might give you a case study about parties to a transaction trying to put together a joint venture, and so on. They're not actually trying to test you for technical knowledge of the law on the one hand, or in the case of management consultancy, strategy on the other. What they really want to know is, can you think? And crucially, have you got enough of a business sense to say, I don't think this looks right to me. Certainly, trainees, when law firms take on trainees, they don't expect trainees to know a lot of law. In your 2 years of your training contract, and when you qualify into your area of practice, you'll spend the next 3 or 4 years learning the law of that area of practice. So that's 5 or 6 years beyond uni and law school where you're learning the law. So they're not testing on the law. What they really want trainees to do is to say, this doesn't feel right to me. So with these case studies, what they really want to get a sense of is, can you see this in a business context? Can you see why the parties involved would be interested in this? And so therefore, why something may not appear right. And the only other thing is that these case studies are sometimes group exercises. And what they're looking for 2 things. One is, how do you interact with other members of the team? Because in these large organizations, you'll almost invariably be working in a team. And secondly, can you demonstrate that you don't dominate the conversation? So if you've got a good idea, can you put it forward in a way that others will listen to, but without actually dominating the conversation? But again, your sense of why are they doing this deal? What's the benefit to the parties? Those very simple questions are the right questions to be asking. It's in a sense, don't over sophisticate it. Don't think that this is something that they're really trying to test your technical knowledge, such as it is. They're not. They really want to get a sense of, can you see the business angles? Are you interested in this? Is this something that you're interested in? Because this is the sort of work that you're going to be doing if you were to join that employer organization. So they want to know that it's going to be of interest to you. Now, how can you, and one of the questions I had is, how can I demonstrate commercial awareness if I've got no work experience to fall back on? One of the ways in which you can kind of liven up that interview discussion is, for example, talking about strategy, because all organizations have a strategy. Their strategy is aimed at delivering that unique sales proposition, what it is about them that makes them different. So how can you talk about strategy? What I'm going to do is just give you, this is stuff I learned myself when I taught on an MBA for lawyers. I'm just going to give you 3 or 4 strategy models that most people in employment or in employer organizations are very, very familiar with. So you can begin to use these to look at an organization strategy and perhaps enter into a conversation with the organization about it, having had a look at their website to see what they say about this. So first of all, what is it? And I mean, there are whole libraries of business books on strategy, but actually it's very simple. It's a plan. What are we going to do? But above all, it's a set of priorities. What are we going to do, but what are we not going to do? Because in an organization, there's no shortage of ideas. There's shortage of time, money, resource in terms of people to make things happen. So a strategy is necessarily going to be confined to 3 or 4 big things the organization wants to do to make a difference to its market position. And usually, business academics will tell you that it splits into a mission, and you don't need to worry about this stuff. How are we going to get to where we want to go? That's what the mission is, and a vision. What is it that we foresee happening? So in the case of the US space program in the 60s, their vision was to put a man on the moon, as simple as that. And usually the best visions are the simplest to articulate. Bill Gates, when he started Microsoft, his vision was to put a personal computer in every home. Now, you might think, well, that's absurd because we've got them on our wrists now or in our pockets. But when he said that, the world was dominated by IBM. And IBM's vision of the world in computer terms was the world will be run by 6 massive mainframe computers, all served by thousands of lab-coated technicians, and they'll have these reels of magnetic tape going backwards and forwards. And Bill Gates came along and said, no, we're going to put one of those in every home. It's going to be a lot smaller. At the time, it was absolutely revolutionary. General Electric's vision after World War II was, we're going to put a refrigerator in every home. You know, of course, we're all used to that now. Not then. So often the most inspiring business leaders have got really simple visions. Steve Jobs with the iPod, put a jukebox in your pocket, 1,000 songs in your pocket. That's what the vision was. So you need to have a vision, and then beyond that, you need to identify and analyze customers' needs. Do you remember what I said about marketing is meeting clients' needs profitably, who your competitors are, and what is the market environment? And what these strategy models help you do is focus on the last two. And you're setting this in the context of what experts in the field call paradigm shifts or secular change. So PESTLE is a mnemonic for this. It stands for political, economic, social, technological, and legal. Those are the big things. Those are the big things that are affecting the tectonic plates supporting any business. Also, the fact we're in a knowledge economy. Peter Drucker, the management consultant who died recently, in the 1990s, he said, every business is part of the knowledge economy. He said, even if you're a farmer and you think that what you do is growing crops and harvesting them, so you think of yourself as a worker, you're not. You're in the knowledge economy, because what makes you special, your USP is knowing what crop to plant when to harvest it, and if you're doing crop rotation, which field to plant it in. And so businesses generally regard themselves as knowledge businesses. And of course, if you're a lawyer as I am, then that suits us very well, because what we say is what we know. So again, in thinking about how business is changing, I've picked out one of the letters from PESTLE, technological, and those are just some of the things that you could look at under the T of PESTLE. And of course, there's climate change, which, as David said, it's absolutely huge. In the way that technological has been the principal driver for the last 30 years, over the next 30 years, climate change is going to be the driver. We are having a secular change, a paradigm shift from technology to environmental. Just a few of these models. This one is by somebody called Grant. I really like this one. Now, Sony, the Japanese company, at one point had a 500-year plan. And people like Grant say, you can't really do that, because you can't just look at the environment, draw up a 500-year plan and forget about it. Strategy is an iterative process. You've got the organization on the left, you know, what is its structure, what are its goals and values, what are its resources and capabilities, how is it organized, what's its style, all of that. You've got that representing the organization on the left. And on the right, you've got the external world that it has to face. And strategy is a way of matching the left to the right. And what organizations have to do is they have to flex themselves as that macro environment changes. Now, you're not really supposed to join strategy models up, but I like to. So within the macro environment, you've got the industry environment. So macro environment is the world at large. The industry environment is who are you competing with? And this next one, Porter's 5 Forces, devised by Michael Porter, absolutely brilliant business academic. He devised this in his 20s and he's still alive. And it's one of the most famous business models around. What he said is, as a business, there are 5 things you need to worry about. You may only be worried about one of them, who your industry competitors are, but if that's the extent of your worry, you're going to go out of business, because you need to worry about 4 other forces. You've got your buyers, your customers. They want you to provide them with more, and they're going to pay you less. Then you've got your suppliers. They want to provide you with less, but make you pay them more. So you probably as a business understand that, but there are 2 others that you need to worry about. One is potential entrants. So I was around as a lawyer at a time when the big accountancy firms started moving into the law. It was absolutely unheard of at the time. These were potential entrants who could take law firms' business. The other is substitutes, customers who say, I don't need to use you anymore. I can do that myself. I can internalize it. So again, setting this in the context of law firms, when big businesses, big banks, financial institutions, big companies started recruiting their own lawyers and creating their own legal departments, those were substitutes. So think about Porter's 5 Forces. It's a really graphic way of understanding the forces that will bend your business. And it's one of those models that business people are generally familiar with. This is very, very famous. This is BCG, Boston Consulting Group. This is their very famous BCG matrix. A lot of these academic business models are what are called 2x2s. This is a typical one. But whereas Porter looks at your business as a whole in the wider context, BCG is a way of looking at the different components of your business and working out where to invest. So you've got the XY axes. X is the market share. So X is what sort of market are you in, and what is your market share of it. The Y axis is how fast is this market growing. And what BCG say is you can analyze the components of your different businesses, and they will fall within one of these 4 boxes. So if you're top right, you're Apple, relatively high market share, it is still growing very fast. So all you can do there is take as much money as you can and invest in it to reinforce your market position. But if you're Samsung, you're top left. So your relative market share is low, but it is a fast growing market. And there you've got to do some thinking. Are you going to commit the whole business to move from top left analyzing to top right? But what if you're in a market which isn't growing very fast? It may be plateauing. Well, if you've got a high share of that market, milk it. Make as much money as you can to push the rest of your business into the top right. If actually your bottom left, it's a dog. It's a market that is not growing, it may be in decline, and you've got a very small share of it, well, just get out. You shouldn't be messing around with it. So the thing about BCG, it's a really helpful way of helping business people look at their business and say, which bits of what we're doing fit where? Should we still be doing this, or should we get out of it? Should we be doing this and make as much money as we can and get out of it? Where should we be investing? So BCG is a very good way of looking at the inside of a business. Now, this next one, I mentioned Sony with a 500-year plan. Somebody called Arie de Gois, a Dutch management consultant, came along about 30, 40 years ago and said, this idea of trying to predict the future is madness. Nobody can do it. But that's not a reason for not trying. What he said is, you don't need to be able to predict the future, which nobody can do. What you need to be is prepared for it, whatever it might be. So you need to use imagination to posit what are the possible scenarios? What if this happened? What if that happened? At the time, in the 70s, he was working with Shell, the oil company. He said to them, what would happen if war broke out in the Middle East? And at the time, they said, well, that's not going to happen. He said, well, humor me. What would happen if it did? And they said, well, there'd be a massive oil shortage and the price would go through the roof. What would you do as a result? They devised a plan. War did break out in the Middle East in 1974. Shell was the only oil company that was able to withstand it. And now, of course, people like Shell and BP, their contingency planning is all around how can we shift from fossil fuel to new and alternate and climate-friendly ways of generating energy. So scenario planning is a really useful way to try to mitigate what the future might hold. And then I think this is pretty well the last one I'll share with you on strategy. It's the good old SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I didn't realize until it was pointed out to me that the strengths and weaknesses are within your control. What are our strengths that we can build on? What are our weaknesses that we can mitigate? The opportunities are external to us. They're outside our control. The threats are external to us. Now, a lot of management consultants and thinkers deride SWOT. They say it's very subjective, it's simplistic, but actually a lot of businesses use it because it's very simple to do. You can get people in a room together and you can say to them, right, let's look at the business that we're involved in. What are the strengths and weaknesses? What are the opportunities and threats? What should we be doing? So the reason I'm telling you this is because this is the sort of stuff that business people think about. And if you are going to talk to them about the strategy of their organization, just have a few of these things at the back of your mind. Because then you say, oh, so how do you, once you've devised a strategy, how do you flex it depending on what's happening in the external environment? Do you go in for contingency planning? It's a way of helping you engage in a discussion. Right, now, I'm going to finally look at some of the questions you've asked that I haven't already addressed and any further that you may have. And I split these into two. So I'm going to have a look at these. What are the best sources for developing commercial awareness? Should you focus on one area or have breadth? how do you start improving, how do you demonstrate a focus, and how to demonstrate if you've got no work experience, which I hope I've begun to answer. The best sources, as I said at the outset, this is a mindset. This is building commercial awareness into what you do on a daily basis. So one of the things that I do is I just scan particular media outlets. In my case, I look at City AM, which is available online every day. They do for free. They do 3 times a day an email that says what's happening in the business world. I find that really, really helpful. It just gives me a heads up. Find your own sources. I mean, something else I look at, I like looking at The Economist, which comes out on Fridays. It has a very good business and finance section. I look at the Financial Times, not every day. Financial Times on weekends is quite good because there they tend to have rather more in-depth articles about business. Find 1 or 2 things that work for you and just make a point of looking at them every day, only for a few minutes. You'll be surprised how quickly you become current with what is going on. Should you focus on one area or have breadth? Well, I think the most important thing is to have a bit of breadth, because if employers are going to do the superficial testing of commercial awareness, what have you seen in the business news that's of interest to you, then it's good to have that breadth. And just in passing, in parentheses, one of the things that you should do is if you've got any particular enthusiasms, then work out how they work as a business. So in my case, I'm very interested in the music business. I know a lot about how it functions as a business. If you're interested in film, how does film function as a business? If you're interested in fashion, football, whatever it is, how do these function as businesses? So I'd say have a bit of breadth, but if you're interested in something, if you've got a passion for something, work out how it works as a business. And if you're interviewing with a particular employer, then just look at their business and see what is current in the business press to do with their business and their sector. If you do those things, you will start to improve your commercial awareness. And I think if you do those things and you follow some of the suggestions that I made so far, you will automatically in an interview be demonstrating commercial awareness by showing that you're interested in business, you're business savvy, you understand the employer organization, you can talk a little bit about strategy, you've had a good look at their website, you understand who their competitors are, you understand who their customers are. If I'm interviewing across the table from somebody who's talking to me about those things, about my business, I'm interested in them because they are commercially aware. And this business is about how to demonstrate commercial awareness if you've no work experience. If you have absolutely no work experience, then the things I've mentioned should help you. But even if you've got a little bit of work experience, you should be able to use that to your advantage. And the thing that has struck me the most recently, I was talking to a student and it turned out that her dad had a fish and chip shop, but she didn't really want to talk about it. She was a bit embarrassed about it. And I said, why? And she said, well, you know, if I'm interviewing with a very big employer in the city, I don't want to admit that my background is my family got a fish and chip shop. And I said to her, do you work in the fish and chip shops? She said, oh yeah, on Friday nights especially. And I said, okay, so I can imagine. She came from Newcastle. I said, I can imagine Newcastle, Friday nights, people pile out of the pubs pre-pandemic. They want their fish and chips. You've got a large queue of people to deal with. They're quite aggressive. They want their stuff done quickly. They want the exact change. You've got to get their order right with the right salt and pepper and vinegar, all that. She said, oh yeah, it's really fast paced. I said to her, are you serving customers? Yes. So you are client facing. High pressured environment, you've got to get their orders right, you've got to get the change right, they're very demanding. Tell me what of that is not commercially aware. And she was absolutely stunned. It had never occurred to her that employers would be interested in that sort of first-hand experience. So when you say you've got no work experience, really trawl through the things that you've done to see if actually there isn't something there that you can use. Now, the other questions that you had were very much along legal lines. And I although I am a lawyer, I've tried to do this from a kind of non-legal point of view, but I know that some of you are looking, you're either reading law or even if you're not, you're looking to work in law firms. So just some questions here. What will the future of law look like? How can commercial awareness matters be described from a legal perspective? What are the main commercial trends law firms are focusing on? Now, the most interesting thing here is that change in the legal profession does not occur at the top. It starts at the bottom. So when I was teaching on an MBA for lawyers, the most dynamic and interesting businesses were the high street businesses. They were changing absolutely markedly because they were right up against changing consumer demands. And they were turning themselves into conveyancing workshops. They were turning themselves into high volume, low value debt collection businesses. So I'm always interested in what is happening in the high street to law firms, because that's where change starts. What's happening in the big firms and what has been happening for the last 20 odd years is what I call the atomization of the role of the lawyer. When I started, you as a lawyer did everything. You did the work, you prospected for clients, you managed your people, you kept your legal knowledge up to date, you did all of those things. Over the last 20 or 30 years, it's been what I call atomized. So big law firms, they now have business development departments. They have knowledge management functions. I was head of that at Hogan Lovells. So the intellectual part of being a lawyer is now hived off to knowledge management and professional support lawyers. They have technology experts who often advise on how law firms can communicate more directly with clients. So you're going to see more of that. I think in the future, we're going to have people who specialize in interfacing with clients. So you have the lawyers who work out the legal solution and then the people who actually present it to the client. So the future of law is going to look more complicated. It's going to be even more competitive than before. And I think that everything that's happened so far is just going to get more pointed. Firms are going to have very distinct strategies, very distinct USPs.
Chris, just to
David,
say,
go on.
Very interesting, because you've touched on the way those law firms as businesses are reshaping themselves. As a slight aside, they're now opening up those other functions to graduates who want to enter and not become lawyers. So you can either be a law student or a non-law student, and you can go and work in one of those knowledge management functions, or you can even go and work in one of their operational support areas and take your career within the law firm in that direction to the level that you've indicated, without actually qualifying, or perhaps staying there for a while before then re-engaging with your qualification route. So that nature of the future of law and how those law firms as businesses themselves are changing is actually opening up opportunities for graduates.
Just a word on that. You're absolutely right. I mean, well, one of the current big things is legal project management. How can law firms manage very big transactions or disputes? And a lot of them are bringing in professional project managers to do exactly that. And one of the other things that they're doing is using a lot of paralegal support to do the more basic work, freeing up the qualified lawyers, the trainees and solicitors to do the more intellectual work. And you're absolutely right. In that sort of context, having any sort of legal background is hugely helpful. So you might have a law degree, and then you might join a law firm in order to do one of these other things. Having that legal background is immensely helpful. I qualified as a lawyer, but I didn't remain a lawyer for very long. And I've done a number of roles in law firms, including knowledge management, training, business development. And the fact that I had a legal background was hugely important, because I understood the law firm as a business, but I also had the lawyers' trust because they knew that I understood what their role involved. So if you have any sort of legal background, even if you don't want to be a lawyer, law firms can be terrific places to work because you can use that legal insight. So I'll just finish off on these last two. When it comes to commercial awareness and what's happening in business, I don't think you need to worry, even if you're interviewing with a law firm, about trying to give your explanation a legal slant. The people across the table are lawyers. They know what the legal slants are. That's not really what they're looking for you to provide. What they want from you is the interest in the business side, and also just a basic understanding of what a transaction is. So what is an acquisition when a company takes over another company? What is a joint venture? Not from the point of view, what is the law involved, but what is actually happening there? What are the commercial drivers? And then the main commercial trends law firms are focusing on. Legal project management is definitely one. The use of technology is huge, the use of AI. And remember, in trying to get your head around what that might mean, as lawyers, lawyers' work product is documents. That's what we deal in. We draft documents. We're working with documents all the time. So this isn't technology in the broadest sense. It's technology in terms of interrogating documents. It takes me right back to where I started with Walmart, using algorithms and data mining techniques. It's looking at huge amounts of data contained in documents and using algorithms to work out the important bits of them the lawyers should be focusing on. So I would say legal project management and use of AI, those are two of the most current themes, I think, in terms of commercial trends in law firms. Just before I finish, my time is almost up. Just one other thing I wanted to mention in a legal context. This is a very famous model that most law firms are familiar with called David Maister's 3 E's. Maister, he spelled master with an I in his name, and he's an ex-Harvard business professor. He's retired now, but his website is still up. Lots of really useful stuff on his website. And what he said is, all lawyers think that what they do is rocket science. It isn't. Most of it is experience work, like mergers and acquisitions, big litigation. If you've done it before, you can do it again. Very, very, very small areas like tax are expertise. But he said, inexorably, these areas of expertise or experience are moving across to efficiency. So I mentioned high street firms turning themselves into conveyancing factories and high volume, low value debt collection. That is an example of efficiency. And I remember presenting this model to the trainees at one of the top law firms in the city, one that does an awful lot of bond issues in the financial markets. And I was really gratified when one of the trainees said, Chris, that David Maister 3 stuff, that efficiency stuff, is our bond practice an efficiency practice? And it was so enlightened, because most lawyers tend to think of that as expertise and experience. And he had spotted, no, that's an efficiency practice. So this is a way in which law firms look at their areas of business. It sits alongside, if you like, the Boston Consulting Group matrix. Now, I'm done. David, I think I just finished in time.
Remarkably. That was a tour de force, Chris. You put up a slide there saying any other questions. I can take them in the chat if anybody's got any, and I can relay them. Certainly, we haven't had many more coming in as you've been speaking. And given that you have delivered as you contracted to deliver to time, I think if no other questions are coming in deference to the audience, I think we will stop at that point, and I shall stop the recording shortly. And all it is left for me to say is a huge thanks to you, Chris, for doing that on behalf of the audience that were listening and the audience that will be listening to it in the future. And a comment has just come in. Thank you very much. That was immensely enlightening and interesting. So I think we'll leave the last word there, if I may.
Well, that's very kind, David. As you know, it's always a huge pleasure doing these things for you. So thank you very much indeed for inviting me. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening.